Welcome to the Ray Hanania Radio Show, brought to you by the U.S. Arab Radio Network and sponsored by Arab News, the leading English language newspaper in the Middle East at arabnews.com. I'm Ray Hanania. This season, the Ray Hanania Show focuses on the U.S. presidential elections on November 5th. First up in segment one is Yossi Mekelberg. An Israeli, Mekelberg is Associate Fellow with the Middle East and North Africa Program at Chatham House since 2002. Next is James Zogby, President of the Arab American Institute. Zogby currently serves as chair of the DNC Ethnic Council, an umbrella organization of Democratic Party leaders of European and Mediterranean descent. He was also a delegate at the convention. For more information on me, you can go to rayhanania.com and hang on, and we're going to come right back to talk with Yossi Mekelberg and James Zogby right after these messages.
ArabNews.com, bringing you breaking news from across the Middle East and the latest on Arabs in America. Get inside the latest headlines with expert analysis and insights at ArabNews.com. Join over 5 million Facebook fans and over 10 million monthly readers. ArabNews.com, news that matters to you. Get ready for an amazing experience at Ishtar Restaurant on 15 Mile Road in Sterling Heights. Enjoy excellent hospitality from owners Ali Al-Baghdadi and Fatty Bonham, serving the best in Mediterranean food. Try Chef Ali Al-Baghdadi's famous shawarma, the best Iraqi grills and food, and the best Arabic and international dishes. Dine in our authentic atmosphere or take out. Call 586-698-2585 or check us out on Facebook. Ishtar Restaurant practices all CDC guidelines and is open every day 11 a.m. to 10 p.m. Have an amazing experience today at Ishtar Restaurant, 3625 15 Mile Road, Sterling Heights. Life for Relief and Development has now been rated as one of the best charities for humanitarian aid. Life's humanitarian projects span the globe, and Life is celebrating its 30th anniversary of providing essential life-saving aid to people and communities in 36 countries, regardless of race, color, religion, or cultural background. Where there is life, there is hope. And when disaster occurs here or around the world, including being one of the first responders to the Turkey-Syria earthquake crisis, Life for Relief and Development rushes in to provide food, medical aid, and shelter to those in need. We are looking to help the earthquake victims, and we take 0% overhead on emergency donations. So please help improve these efforts. Learn more about our involvement to help the helpless and bring hope where it's needed most, and make your tax-deductible donation to Life for Relief and Development now at lifeusa.org or call 248-424-7493. That's 248-424-7493.
As the weather gets colder, it's a good idea to layer up with scarves, hats, and mittens. Another layer of protection this season is to get your flu and COVID-19 vaccines. You can get both vaccines at the same time. Talk to your healthcare provider or learn more at michigan.gov/COVID-flu-RSV and layer up for some added peace of mind. A message from the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services.
And welcome back, everybody, to the Ray Hanania Show. I'm Ray Hanania, of course. I want to welcome my next guest, somebody I've known for a long time. He's actually a colleague of mine at Arab News, a columnist there. He does a phenomenal job. I love reading his columns. Yossi Mekelberg. He's an associate fellow with the Middle East and North Africa Program at Chatham House since 2002. He was previously professor of international relations at Regent University, where he was head of the International Relations and Social Sciences Program and the faculty lead on outreach projects. He had taught at Regent University since 1996, and before that at King's College in London. First of all, how's the weather in the UK, Yossi? How is everything over there? Good, I hope.
It's not too bad. When 22 degrees Celsius and a bit cloudy, but expect tomorrow because it's a bank holiday, and usually it rains on a bank holiday weekend. It's a long weekend, so expect rain tomorrow.
And the British are used to miserable weather, right? So you're not shocked when the world is miserable, are you, as British people?
Yeah, I think we learn to ignore it. It doesn't register that it's actually so miserable sometimes, but it's not too bad. The summer but we'll see tomorrow, especially that I'm going to see my favorite football team, and it's supposed to be very wet.
All right. Well, we hope you have a good experience there. But of course, talking about miserable situations, the Middle East is probably at the worst situation they've ever been as a result of the violence that took place October 7th by Hamas and the subsequent 10 months of violence by Israel's government. This is really worse than I've ever seen. I mean, it's hard to believe that there's going to be a moment when the two sides can come together. What's the likelihood that the two sides can actually get past this and reach a peace accord? Doesn't this make it impossible to do this?
Thank you, and thank you for having me again on your show. It's a great privilege. And I think, we've been observing this situation for many years. And I think we couldn't imagine that it will get that bad. We always thought, or for a long time, the situation is deteriorating. We thought it was unsustainable before October 7. At one point or another, it would implode, but probably in the most horrific way that we the people there, have experienced that since October 7. Now, on the one hand, if people both in Israel and Palestine and in the region and the rest in the international community, they haven't reached now the conclusion that there is a desperate and urgent need to solve this once and for all in a just and fair way, when are they going to reach this conclusion? At the same time, there is the Israel and Palestinians still not at the point that they trust each other enough. They thought that the war reached its conclusion and are not in a hurry, unfortunately. And I talk more about the leadership than the people themselves to sign a ceasefire agreement, to see the hostages back, to start the reconstruction of Gaza. But this has to happen at one point or another. I always take solace of the fact that all wars come to an end at one point or another. The unfortunate thing is the price that's on the way. And the price is usually not paid by the leadership, it's paid by the people. And we see it right now. We saw it what happened on October 7 in Israel. And we see it, since then, the heavy price that is paid by so many Palestinians on a daily basis. But I think the one thing we should focus on is that at the end of the day, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is not ahistorical, and there is no reason that it can't find a reasonable solution. It's not going to satisfy everyone, but it will be enough to move away from the bloodshed, the horrible bloodshed that we see now.
And I guess I should ask about Israeli politics and then U.S. politics and how it plays into this conflict from the standpoint of Israel's government. And I always like to distinguish when I talk to people. There's Israelis as people, there's Palestinians as people, and then there are Israelis as government. To question government, I think, is legitimate, and respect people is also a legitimate thing. But when we look at the Israeli government, it seems that Netanyahu doesn't want peace. From an Arab American perspective, maybe from the Palestinian perspective, how do you respond to people when you hear that he doesn't want peace, so we can't have peace as long as his government is in place?
They say that every country gets the leaders that it deserves. I think in the case of Israeli government, the punishment is way bigger than the sin. So I think Israel deserves better leadership. The only conclusion I can reach is Netanyahu is not interested in peace based on two-state solution, which, with all the faults and all the misgivings that one might have on a two-state solution, it's still the best alternative that exists, the best option. I think part of with Hamas and all the idea of siphoning money to Hamas and things like that, maintain the divisions among Palestinians between the Fatah and Hamas, the West Bank and Gaza, was all about derailing any idea of a two-state solution. So if this is the solution that can bring peace, I don't think Netanyahu is by any shape or form a supporter of it. But we have to remember that's what happened in the last almost 2 years now, since Netanyahu formed his last government, was under very specific condition. Under any other different circumstances, you would not have formed a coalition with the very far right. He's still not a supporter of a peace agreement, but won't be in the same coalition with the very far right. But because of his corruption trial, he would sit in government whoever is ready to share power with him. And they're far right. They've seen the opportunity here to advance their agenda. And that's where we are stuck in this situation, which also led to an attempt to weaken the democratic system in Israel, weaken the judicial system in Israel, especially the Supreme Court, that lets also to weaken Israel's preparedness to war. And that's the kind of crisis that Israel, it's a prolonged crisis in Israel politics, but at the end of the day, neither this government nor Netanyahu are friends of peace and end this conflict through a two-state solution. If at all, it's more a government that looks into the annexation of the West Bank, and some even talk about the occupation or reoccupation of Gaza and building settlements there.
Yeah, that doesn't sound like a positive contribution towards peace. So it sounds like Netanyahu found himself in a bad situation 2 years ago, facing 3 corruption charges, decided to make a deal with the devil, which is the far right. But in order to do that, he had to give them everything they wanted, which was a complete rejection, not just in a political way, but in a hard way of peace and statehood for the Palestinians.
He was ready to give everything because the situation that Netanyahu, he could have signed a plea bargain years ago. He didn't want to sign a plea bargain.
Right.
So he said the easiest way to derail is corruption trial for fraud, for bribery, for breach of trust, is by staying in power indefinitely. Part of it, I think, when you are so long in power, and altogether Netanyahu had been more than 18 years prime minister, you start believing there is no one that deserves to replace you, which of course is a big historical mistake. But on the other hand, is the sense that he needs to be there to weaken the judiciary, prolong his trial almost indefinitely. The trial is already going now for 4 years. Then if it comes to a conclusion, there will be an appeal. And then, we'll see what happens. For this, he needs a coalition. And the coalition, that the only one that he could form is the one with the Ben-Gvirs and Ben the Smotrich of this world. And we see what happened, whether it's settler violence and expansion of settlements, or even now, telling Netanyahu that if he would sign a ceasefire agreement, they might leave the coalition, and as a result, lead to fresh election.
And I guess the question then is, would fresh elections change anything? Do you really think it would make things better? What would change? Let's say if Netanyahu lost and he wasn't the prime minister, with all the options out there, would it be better or maybe just a little bit better?
Yeah, I think first, if 4, 5, 6 months ago, we thought that any election will bring the end of Netanyahu's career, even this is not that certain anymore. He's doing better and better. And that's the way, what we call the toxic machine that he is using against the military, against the opposition, against civil society. Everyone is to blame for what's happening but Netanyahu. So this is one thing. I think if at all, I look at Netanyahu as a bottleneck. It's not going to solve everything, but it will start a different process, a different conversation. Look, it's enough to see the vote in the Knesset recently, last month, in which 68 members of Knesset against 9 declare that they are opposed to a two-state solution, to the establishment of a Palestinian state. Even Yair Lapid, who as a prime minister from the podium of the United Nations General Assembly, said that this is the only way forward, he left the chamber in order not to vote. The Labour, as well, they didn't vote, they stayed out of it. So the question, to your question, who is supporting it? What's going to change? I think it will be a gradual one. It will be with the end, hopefully, soon of the war, with a different government when and if it happens, it might start a new conversation.
And in the United States, of course, it's a whole different ballgame, but in a way, it's parallel to what happens in Israel. Israel has a very strong lobby in the United States, AIPAC, the Political Action Committee, a network. They were bragging that they have won 284 elections that they backed. Every candidate they supported in 284 elections won. And to get AIPAC money, you obviously have to support the Netanyahu government. Two progressive Congress people, Cori Bush and Jamal Bowman, lost their races because of the fight with AIPAC. How, before I even get into the specifics of our current political election coming up, how does that not contribute to the conflict? That the U.S. doesn't even really have the wherewithal to force Israel's government to change, to do what's right.
My personal view for many years that AIPAC is causing more damage than any good, not only in the United States. I think the damage this causes to Israel. Because if the idea that prolonging and perpetuating the conflict with Palestinians is the thing which serves Israel's security interest, well-being, I think it's a mistake. And you know, as well as I, that the liberal, progressive elements in the Jewish community in the United States is very strong. Maybe they don't manage to translate it into influence. Sometimes the way that AIPAC would like at least people to believe they have. And as a result of it, we're stuck in this kind of, you have to support not Israel, you have to support the Israeli government. Whatever the Israeli does and say, we need to support. I think it betrays Israel's interest to reach a peace agreement with Palestinians by that they secure its well-being, security in the long term. We know in recent years that it put under threat the normalization with other countries, including the possibility of normalization with Saudi Arabia, let alone we've seen over the last year how supporting the war in Gaza improved Israel position in any shape or form. So we need to change this discourse in the United States. The other thing is what's about American interest. Where is the American interest lying there? When Blinken now, on his 9th visit to the region, almost begging for a ceasefire, and I'm saying it's not 100% Israel's fault. Hamas plays its role as well. But it's enough that Netanyahu is delaying and putting a new condition. While it's linked also to the possibility or the threat, the danger of a regional war, this is where it intervenes with American interest, the implication of a regional war and American interest. So discussion should be also what is good for America.
Yeah, you don't hear that question asked or answered when we talk about the Middle East sometimes. On the one hand, Israel has AIPAC to help. It's kind of like a side guard, so Israel's government has someone here in the United States to help them protect their interests. The Arab world doesn't have anybody in the U.S., do they? The Arab and Muslim community is disorganized. They're good people, don't get me wrong. I'm part of the community. I know all the leaders, but we have nothing that comes even close to the influence that Israel's government has here in the United States. How do we, is that part of the problem, that the Arab world and the Arab and Muslim Americans, we don't do enough to influence American politics?
I must give credit to AIPAC. they set objectives and they manage to translate it into reality. That's what you expect of a lobby.
I may not agree with it, but they've done a great job with doing what they wanted to do, right?
Yeah. So the question, what those of us who think that actually they are causing damage, why not organized enough,
right,
and mobilize their resources in order to counteract that? They have their agenda. They utilize their resources in a very effective way. So we look at those who are more progressive, but those who believe that you don't need to support Israeli government, whatever it does, support peace, support coexistence, support reconciliation, support Israel's security, support its well-being long term. And we have to admit, again, those forces have failed, and not only in the United States, in other places. The idea that connecting, linking between supporting Israel and perpetuating the conflict with the Palestinians, instead of reversing the conversation that long-term security and well-being is based on peace and based on normalization, that's all of those who support it, we have to admit we failed.
When you look at now, of course, the United States is in a presidential election over the next 8 weeks or whatever. We'll have a new president, maybe. I'm not even sure if it'll even be decided, because there's a third party that could take away some electoral college votes and force it into a battle in the House. There's a whole complex situation. But how important is the American election for president to peace in the Middle East? In other words, I know that you got to get Israelis and Palestinians to hug each other and say, okay, we need to stop this. But what's the role of the United States? How important is the American role in deciding what happens in that relation between Israelis and Palestinians?
I think the United States is crucial. What I don't like sometimes when it comes to this discussion with Europeans, whenever I have a discussion with officials from the European Union, they also say it's only the American, because I think the EU can play a part. I think the region can play a very important part. So just to look and say, there is only one peace broker.
Right.
That's not right, especially when one side doesn't really trust this peace broker. So I think we need a coalition of peace brokers. I think at the end of the day, Israel-Palestine peace is important American interest. But from domestic point of view, I know we are sometimes in the media, we are sometimes in academia, we are getting quite excited about international affairs. But when I look at surveys in the United States, most American people, they're going to the ballot box and they think about affordable and available healthcare. They will think about crime, the level of crimes. They think about the cost of living, the economy, employment, and probably foreign affairs. Unless the American leadership can link between what happens in the world, that how it affects what happened domestically, this is not going to affect election. So we follow what we see sometimes in the streets. At the end of the day, I doubt how much it's going to affect how people vote in the ballot box.
And when you look at the election between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, do you really think it makes a difference which one wins? I mean, I think you made a good point that right now it's really the U.S. that's kind of running this relationship between Israeli and Palestinians. Maybe they need a coalition with Europe and other voices. I'm not sure the U.S. is going to allow that to happen, or even AIPAC will allow that to happen. But is there a difference? Can there be a difference in terms of who's elected, whether it's Trump is president or whether Kamala Harris is president? Do you have a sense in terms of which would lead us in a more positive direction, and how positive would it be?
I must admit that I'm a bit in a denial about even the possibility of Trump's second term. So, but I think there is different. The thing about Trump is the unpredictability. You never know where you're going to get them, what you're going to get them. With Kamala Harris, it will be more predictable, and even if we don't always like what we are going to see. But I think if any new president will learn anything from history, they will see that there is a room, there is space for an American president to make a move. Jimmy Carter, as president, he used his power and an influence on Israel, and at the same time, it achieved peace, an historical peace with Egypt. Maybe the United States was not as involved in the early stage of the Oslo agreement, but definitely in the later stages. When the Bush administration, Bush the father, was upset with expanding settlements and decided to suspend the loan guarantees, it did so. So the idea that that AIPAC will, or anyone else will influence American presidents to do exactly what Israel wants, I think it's a myth that actually serves AIPAC. And breaking this myth can help a new president know there is an opportunity, especially considering what has happened in the last 10 and a half months and how it affected, how much time of the Secretary of State and the President has to be dedicated to dealing with an issue that is important, but it's amplified because it's regional and international implication. So I think it creates a space, especially in the first year, an opportunity to do something differently. Are they going to do that? Your guess is good as mine.
And then final question, obviously, that, we still hope for a two-state solution seems to be the most sensible, common sense way to end the conflict. But we see facts change on the ground, expanded settlements. Things can be reversed, some people say, but what do you say to people when they say, it's not possible anymore to do a two-state solution? Is it possible to still do a two-state solution regardless of the events, the horror of the events, regardless of the changes on the ground? Can there still be a two-state solution?
I think you and I both saw so many final nails in the coffin of the two-state solution. It's full of final nails.
Yeah.
And I always look at the alternatives. If someone will show me there is a better alternative in which everyone, Palestinians and Israel, have the same political, social, civil rights, human rights, why not? Put it on the table. I haven't seen one. Now, the facts on the ground, and let's put it on the table. Expansion of settlements, the settler population, more than 700,000. The encircling of East Jerusalem with settlements made it more difficult. What we need to look is creating a two-state solution in a one-state reality. To look into a different modality than probably we looked at in 1993. And one of the options is to look into confederation. You have two states, but also because of the size of the territory, that doesn't need hard borders. Need to think almost a kind of a EU style, that people can move from one side to the other freely. Look at Jerusalem as the capital of both, but no need for more walls. Actually, walls should come down. I mean the new one, not the old ones. So I think in this sense, we need to look at the modalities, but for this, we also need new leadership in both, new Palestinians and Israel leadership, but an international community that is devoted, dedicated, and can look long-term how to resolve it and make sure that both sides understand that this is also not only their interest, but also the interest of the international community.
I want to thank my guest, Yossi Mekelberg. He's a colleague of mine as a columnist at Arab News. You should read his columns and analysis. They're very insightful. He offers an important perspective on what could happen and what is happening in the Middle East. He's an associate fellow with Middle East and North Africa programs at Chatham House. And, we a guest on our show we always appreciate you being with us. Thank you, Yossi.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. Always a pleasure.
We'll talk later.
ArabNews.com, bringing you breaking news from across the Middle East and the latest on Arabs in America. Get inside the latest headlines with expert analysis and insights at ArabNews.com. Join over 5 million Facebook fans and over 10 million monthly readers. ArabNews.com, news that matters to you.
Hey Michigan, let's think beyond the sink and learn where the water your family drinks every day comes from. Private wells and public water supplies allow homes across Michigan to draw water from different sources like lakes, rivers, and groundwater. Tap into the facts about your home's water source and learn about your home's water quality to protect your family's health. Visit michigan.gov/care for MI drinking water. A message from the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services.
Ziyad brand. Quality products from our family to yours. Ziyad Brothers Importing offers the finest quality products, including brands like Sultan, Kraft, Nestle, Hook, Rico Picon, Donna, and many more. Ask your retailer to carry these fine products because you deserve the very best. For more information, visit our website at www.ziyad.com. That's www.ziyad.com. Ziyad, quality products from our family to yours.
And welcome back, everybody. I want to welcome our next guest, Jim Zogby, the president of the Arab American Institute. I don't think there's anyone who has done more to empower Arab American voter rights or champion the rights of Arab Americans more than Jim has over the years. Zogby was a DNC delegate at the convention, and he currently serves as chair of the DNC Ethnic Council, an umbrella organization of Democratic Party leaders of European and Mediterranean descent. He co-organized several public forums that paralleled the convention, which showcased the voices of Arabs on the Israel-Gaza conflict and the Middle East. Jim, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Ray.
It's always a pleasure to have you on there. I mean, listen, we just came out of this convention. What do you make, first of all, of Vice President Kamala Harris's brief comments? I think they were like about 40 seconds out of a 35-minute speech. Considering that's such a big issue, didn't seem like she paid enough attention to it. But what did you make about her comments on Israel and Gaza?
Look, the first part of the comments were typical. I mean, everybody says that. The second part had never been said before. Go back in history and look at past presidents, and no one has ever actually mentioned the word Palestine or talked about self-determination. Her words about suffering were quite extraordinary. I've seen a lot of naysayers.
Okay.
She approached the suffering in the passive voice. She didn't accuse Israel of whatever, and that's all true. I keep telling people we're not in a sprint, we're in a marathon, and the progress that gets made is slow, but it's a step forward. And I am not someone who is being a Pollyanna about it. I've been accused of that, or saying the glass is half full. I remember when we didn't have a glass, and now we're filling it. And I think it's due to an incredible amount of work done by so many people across the country that have elevated this issue. Look, there is a genocide unfolding. There's no question about it. But there have been these kinds of brutal assaults before. There was Lebanon in '82 with Israel, and there was the '67 war. There was lots of stuff that's happened to Palestinians and to Lebanese across the region. And this is the first candidate to actually make it an issue that they were going to talk about at all. That's the point. Never
so significant. So it's significant.
I mean, I came out of the convention, I wrote an article saying Palestine won at the convention. Why did it win?
Wow.
It won because I've discovered in the movement, of all the movements, anti-war, civil rights, whatever movement we've had, that when you reach a certain threshold, even when you're ignored, you win. Even when you're shut aside, you win. Because they didn't let a Palestinian speak. Guess what happened? It became the news story for 2, 3, 4 days running. We still have people who the media didn't even know about last week are now featured on CNN, MSNBC, and all the other networks. I think the campaign made a strategic error, but what they did was they elevated Palestinian voices by denying them a voice. They elevated the voice. Right. That's consequential.
Right. And then also, I mean, you and I understand American politics. A lot of times, politicians will go so far, and even though they may not go as far as we want them to go, an election takes place, and the fact that they even took those few steps becomes the foundation for more policy later. Is that how you see Harris? I mean, she did say some, I was glad she even mentioned it, given all the controversy. But do you see that happening with her moving
I don't know.
further?
I don't know. A lot of it will depend on us. A lot of it will depend on whether the movement is sustained. I believe that it will be sustained, and I believe we can continue to put pressure. I know that they feel the pressure in the campaign. They were negotiating, and I was a part of those discussions for 4 days to meet the demands that we put forward. They did give us a panel that was an officially sanctioned panel that for the first time featured our voices, Palestinian voices. Look, the last time Palestine was talked about at a Democratic convention was 1988, and it was me.
Right.
And so when people
you were there with Jesse Jackson,
and the difference
raise our voice.
And the difference here is that when we did it in 88, it was a Jackson-powered movement. There was no candidate elevating this issue. This was done from the bottom up. This was done by people, Abbas Alawiya and Layla El-Abed, people that nobody even knew before, who earned their role on the center of this because they did incredible work and they strategically handled it so well. Even at the convention, the tactic they used to walk out and do a sit-in when the word came they weren't going to get a speaker, turned out to be a stroke of genius, because what happened? Media followed them. We did 3 press conferences in the next 2 days that had literally everybody who could cover anything being there. And so it's part of the narrative now of this convention that Palestine was a centerpiece. Didn't bring the house down. But you say it's a win. It's a win. And Jesse Jackson taught me 2 things. One is, when you get a win, embrace it. Don't turn your back. Don't sit on your laurels and think it's over. But when you get a win, embrace it and figure, how do we move it forward? The other lesson Jesse taught me was that don't ever quit, because if you quit, it's exactly what your enemies want. What they fear most is that you'll stay and fight.
So you're basically saying to the Arab community, Palestine, it sounds like, is now the center, at least, of a major national discussion, even though they didn't allow Palestinians to speak during prime time on TV, during the convention. You did have a voice. It became an issue, and that's a positive.
It became an issue because they denied a voice.
Right.
And so media came and talked to us in a way that they had not before. And the young woman in Georgia has been on every network, has been interviewed by everybody. Now, if they'd let her speak at the convention, people would have forgotten her name by now. But she's now in the center of the debate because they made a strategic, boneheaded error.
That's true. If they would have just let her talk, a lot of people would have just moved on to the next topic.
Tell me the name of the Israeli family that spoke. You can't, because nobody remembers it. But people will remember that a Palestinian was not allowed to speak. Big deal. So that's the point. We're at a point in this discussion where we've crossed the threshold from being ignored to you can't ignore. And when you do ignore, you pay the price. We don't pay the price. So it's a question of, do we approach this as petulant teenagers who get, I'm mad, they didn't let anybody speak, whatever. Or do we approach it as serious political folk who say they blew it and we're taking advantage of their mistake?
Do you think the Harris campaign, though, looks at it from that positive perspective.
I don't care
in
how
this
they look
sense?
at it. I don't care how they look at it. I know how I look at it, and I know what we did. And I know that there are people in the campaign that we've been talking to who could not believe that the decision came to not let us speak.
So there
And
were people who supported it
yeah.
on the Democratic
Yeah.
side.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know where the decision came from, but wherever it came from was a boneheaded, I've been calling it an unforced error. They didn't have to do this. They did it. It was a mistake, and we benefited from their mistake.
And when you talk to Arab voters around the country, because they have a significant vote in some of the swing states and in a few of the battleground states, what do you tell them? I mean, because you're right. I mean, a lot of people have said, oh, my God, this is upset. I'm going to just forget it. I'm never going to be a Democrat again. What do you tell them? I mean, I think I know.
Walk away and you lose, stick around and fight, and you can win. And the other thing is, Jill Stein's not running in this election. Cornel West is not running in this election. It may not be the election you want, but it's the election you've got. And if we want people to support us, and we do, then we've got to support them. And yes, Kamala Harris may not be the best thing since sliced bread, but don't tell me that it can't get any worse if Donald Trump is president. Don't tell me it doesn't matter. It does matter. And it matters not only to us, but it matters to Black folk, Latino folk, Asian immigrants generally, poor people, the environment, women. And we have to be mature about this. They are embracing us right now. We cannot turn our back on the coalitions that brought us to this far. We have a responsibility back to them too. And for a lot of Black people in America, this is historic, having a woman of color run for president. We can't ignore that. We can't go into the Black church and say, she didn't say what we wanted her to say on Palestine, so we're dumping her and we're going to go with Cornel West. No, that's irresponsible. If we care about the people of Palestine, if we care about the people of Lebanon, if we care about the future of our children here in America, we have to make a very mature decision here. May not be perfect, but the issue is no longer us versus the establishment of the Democratic Party. It's Kamala Harris versus Donald Trump. Do not tell me it makes no difference. Don't tell me it didn't make a difference if Al Gore had beaten George Bush, or if Hillary Clinton, who I had real difficulty supporting, if she had not won against Donald Trump. Don't tell me there would be nothing different.
Why did the Democrats make it so difficult? Because I could not support Hillary Clinton.
It was hard.
That opened the door to these past 8 years that have been very rough.
Yeah, very hard. She made it very hard. She was a terrible candidate, and I'm not fond of her in any way, shape, or form. But Donald Trump was a disaster as a person, as a president. And all the things he did, his deplorable behavior toward women, the way he encouraged violent, not only debate, but violent behavior, the level of rancor in our political discourse, the amount of hate crimes that increased against our people, and January 6th, which I don't think anyone should ever forget. They're trying to make it out to be a stroll in the park or a tour, a peaceful tour of the Capitol building. This was an insurrection. And I know there are people out there saying, yeah, they deserved it, whatever. No, do not look, we have a right to be angry. We don't have the luxury of being angry. We have to think politically.
Are we bystanders, you think, Arab Americans, to this political battle that's taking place between the right and the left? And you're saying we have to look at the best interests on our side?
On our side, it's that people who are allies in this movement. Evangelical, right wing, no. The Proud Boys, no. Moms Against Liberty, Moms for Liberty, they call themselves, no. They're not our allies are are in the civil rights movement. Our allies are in the women's movement. Our allies are in the folks who marched against guns. Look at the marches that have taken place over the last 8 years. It's the same people in those marches that are in the marches for Palestine now. The same students who campaigned on those issues are campaigning. One difference: in some of those marches, our people were not present. Our people were not present. And that is where the error is. We can't expect them to march for us and with us, and we not march for and with them. May not be perfect, may not be all that we want, but we build allies by being allies, not by saying we're just, we're right, you have to support us, but we don't give it about you. That's the difference here.
And when you say, hey, okay, we can be angry, we can be emotional, we didn't get all that we wanted, but what we want is still in this one direction. And we have a chance to get it. Is it we need to work more to get it? Or is it just politics is that strange beast where you have to really understand it, and it is there for us to get?
Politics is messy. It's not easy. You make choices sometimes that aren't the perfect ones you want, but there is no way to victory that is outside of politics. If there were, if locking ourselves in our room and throwing furniture around and mom and dad take that because if that was the way to change behavior, I'd say, fine, do it. If I'm so proud of the students who demonstrated, that's not going to bring victory. It's important that they did what they did and that they continue to do what they do. The campuses are not going to be quiet in the fall.
Right.
But if that isn't translated into politics that ultimately moves votes, that ultimately defeats some people, that ultimately wins for some other people, and that those who win say, I won because those people stood behind me. My generation, your generation, remembers Pete McCloskey. Pete McCloskey won his first election in 1967. A Marine colonel, Republican, ran against Shirley Temple and beat her on the issue of being opposed to the war in Vietnam. No Republican had ever done that before. And when he won that election, he came to Washington, and members of Congress were going, oh, geez, you mean you can lose on that election, that issue? And it actually had an impact on turning attitudes. Why do you think AIPAC puts $20 million into beating Jamal Bowman?
Yeah.
Why did they try to beat Cori Bush? Why are they? Because they know that if they lose elections, they're going to lose votes in Congress. They're going to lose support for Israel. So they're putting everything they've got into it. So our demonstrations are great. We got to win elections. We've got to defeat some of their people. And we're not going to defeat some of their people with Jill Stein. We're not. We're not going to win elections.
Regardless of how nice she is and how much she may embrace
nice
our views.
Person, whatever. Right. It's great. But
that's not it.
It's a joyride. You feel pure, you feel perfect, but at the end of the day, nothing happened. It doesn't mean that I'm not denouncing or criticizing her. I'm just saying, let's be relevant. Right. If we care about the people in Gaza, then let's figure out how do we strategically do something that makes a difference.
And I want to go back to a point that you kind of touched on, and that is the Black community has done so much to support the Arab community. They have sacrificed so much. Cori Bush, Jamal Bowman, people have lost because they've spoken up for us in the Black community, correct? Mm-hmm. Don't we need to be loyal to them at a time when they feel this is an important election?
Absolutely. And that's the key, is to think strategically and politically about where we go and not look. I hate to say this because I know people will take offense and say I'm being, patronizing, whatever, but there is a bit of infantile behavior here when people throw a tantrum. I'm not going to do this and blah, 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 whatever. And the names I've been called by people who, I mean, you can call me names, call me a sellout, call me an establishment shill,
not a sellout.
Call me all that stuff, No, but I mean, people do that.
Yeah, they say that.
The point is that you tell me you tell me how we move toward freedom. Tell me how we move toward victory. And if you think, like I said, that being the angry teenager goes up to his room and starts shouting, screaming, and throwing furniture around is actually going to change behavior, change his parents' mind, fine. You can't show me how that works, because it doesn't. It doesn't. What ultimately works is we got to win elections. We have to do the hard, awful work of getting out there, winning votes, proving ourselves to be effective in the political arena, because it's not perfect, it's not pure, but there is no victory outside of winning elections in this to change behavior and change politics. I mean, Donald Trump tried to do it by taking over the Congress. We're going to mobilize tens of thousands of people to storm the Capitol for Palestine. Yeah, that'll work well, won't it?
I felt like when something happened when I was young, my dad would sit me down and say, "Listen, things aren't always perfect," and he kind of set my keel correct and would talk to me in a smart way. I feel like you just did the same thing that my dad did, and I wonder if the community needs this, and does the Democrats recognize that this is a powerful message that you just made, that not just benefits them, but benefits the Arab community in America, that we need to get past our anger and emotion and look at the bottom line. Do they recognize, what you're doing as being a tremendous asset? Because I hear them on both sides being scared or being worried, and should they leave us?
I don't think they do, and my audience isn't them anyway. My audience is our community. My audience is our community. I don't give a damn what Jesse Jackson used to call the smart ass white boys, the consultant class who drive the campaign. I don't care what they think. What I care about is I want our people to be relevant in politics and use the leverage they've got to make a difference. And we have leverage, but you can have that leverage and move it in the wrong direction and get nowhere, or you can have that leverage and use it as Abbas Alawiya and Layla Al-Abed have done through the uncommitted movement. And listen to them carefully, and then listen to some of the others, and you'll see the difference. They have never wanted to steer those voters away from the political arena. They're not doing that. They were never part of Abandon Biden. They're not part of, Killer Kamala. They're not part of we're going to take our votes and stay home, or we're going to do Jill Stein. I mean, that's what some of the Arab groups have done. And frankly, it's irresponsible. It's irresponsible. They've always said we have to continue to use the leverage. We have to push to change politics as it really is. I remember Julian Bond years ago, 1968 at the convention. He led the Georgia mixed delegation that had a black and white mixed delegation running against the official state party one that was all white. And first day of the convention, they won that battle. They won the battle for a mixed delegation. Second day was the war in Vietnam, was centerpiece to the Democratic Party platform. And Julian Bond was a crossover, civil rights and anti-war. And he was one of the leaders advocating to end the war in Vietnam. And that lost. Next day was the nominations for vice president, and Muskie was the choice of the establishment, and the anti-war folks wanted Julian Bond to run, and they were there standing on the chairs chanting Julian Bond because the convention was trying to lock it out, and that's when Daley brought the cops into the convention to beat up the delegates. Third night, Humphrey came out to give his victory speech. Muskie came out and they were on stage. The balloon dropped. Behind the stage, Julian Bond comes walking out, gets in the middle of them and puts their hands up as a sign of unity. I didn't know Julian then, but I met him about 4 years later. He then ended up living in my neighborhood, and we did some stuff together. But I said to him when I met him, I was driving him to the airport, I said, "What'd you do that for? You broke our hearts. Why did you do that?" He said, "Look," he said, "there's two kinds of people. There are those who sort of look at the muck of the world and say, I can't get involved in that. because my principles say I can't do that. And so they sit high up in their pinnacle overlooking the political battle and say, it's not principled and I'm not getting involved. It's going to get worse and then it'll get better. And he said, and then there are those who say there's all that muck in the world and people are suffering. I got to get down in the trenches and make some ugly choices and difficult decisions because I got to try to make it a little bit better. He said, I have to be with that school, not the other school. And he said, so at that point, the election was no longer Julian Bond versus Hubert Humphrey, but it was Hubert Humphrey versus Richard Nixon. I had to make a choice, and that was the choice, the only choice I could make. And that's how I feel now. It's like you might not like it, may not be perfect. You might have wanted to have Jesse Jackson as the president. You might have wanted to have Cornel West as he's not the candidate. They're not the candidate. The candidate right now is Kamala Harris. And frankly, what she said, no presidential candidate has ever said at a convention before. She even mentioned the word, even if she just said Palestine. I remember in '88 when I wanted to introduce the plank for Palestinian rights, Madeleine Albright said, if you even say the P word at the convention, all hell will break loose. Couldn't say the P word. I went out and said it.
Wow.
The last time it was said was 36 years ago. And this time it was said by the candidate for president of the United States.
Jim,
take the win. Take the win.
You've had an impact on me. I got to tell you, it really has. I want to thank my guest, Jim Zogby. Like I said, this guy knows American politics better than anybody in our community. Jim, I so appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you. And Ray, I so appreciate you.
You're a good guy. Oh, okay.
ArabNews.com, bringing you breaking news from across the Middle East and the latest on Arabs in America. Get inside the latest headlines with expert analysis and insights at ArabNews.com. Join over 5 million Facebook fans and over 10 million monthly readers. ArabNews.com, news that matters to you. With more than 30,000 successful in vitro fertilizations, IVF Michigan is now ranked as one of America's best fertility clinics according to Newsweek magazine. IVF Michigan fertility centers are the recognized leaders in high-quality fertility care. With locations in Bloomfield Hills and 9 other cities in Michigan and Ohio, IVF has experts in all aspects of the field. A founding member, American board-certified Dr. Nicholas Shama, is one of the leading reproductive endocrinologists in Michigan and Ohio. He has performed over 20,000 successful IVF cases, and it's helped thousands of couples fulfill their dreams of parenthood. When it's time to get personalized care from Dr. Nicholas Shama at one of America's best fertility clinics, call IVF Michigan Fertility Centers in Michigan and Ohio toll-free at 855-952-9600. 855-952-9600. At Top Rehab Physical Therapy Clinic in Dearborn, we provide effective physical therapy sessions in order to limit pain and discomfort. Top Rehab provides physical therapy care for any diagnosis prescribed by a physician, and we regularly see and treat conditions such as stroke, TMJ, fibromyalgia, sciatica, joint pain, and more. We use a variety of pain management methods, including modalities, soft tissue mobilization, and therapeutic exercise. If you're in need of physical rehabilitation or physical therapy, get the highest quality health care at Top Rehab. Most insurance is accepted, and we're open Monday, Wednesday, and Friday 8 to 6, Tuesday and Thursday 8 to 5, and Saturday 10 till 2. Call for an appointment today at 313-846-0555. That's 313-846-0555. Choose Top Rehab Physical Therapy Clinic on Michigan Avenue in Dearborn. Life's too short to be in pain.
Thank you for listening to the Ray Hanania Radio Show, brought to you by the U.S. Arab Radio Network and sponsored by Arab News, the leading English language newspaper in the Middle East at ArabNews.com. Join us again next Thursday night here at WNZK AM 690 Radio for another episode exploring the presidential elections, Arab Americans, and Middle East and U.S. politics. I'm Ray Hanania. Get more information on all of my writing, my radio programs, and podcasts by visiting Hanania.com. Talk to you next week, everybody. Bye-bye.